everyone from Havana, Cuba. I would like to say hello to all those connected to different media from different parts of the world to this space that will offer some possibilities about the political campaign and media campaign against Cuba in the last weeks, organized by the journalist organizations Casa de las Américas, the National Association of Economists and Accountants of Cuba, the Network Defending Humanity, the Martin Luther King Jr. Association, and some other associations in Cuba. This event to speak about Cuba, to make reflections and dialogue about the challenges of the Cuban Revolution in present circumstances. Martin, in the role he plays, is the name of an essay written by Cynthia Etienne in another difficult moment of the Cuban Revolution. When we call to this space, we also take some stories about that difficult moment I mentioned before. In this virtual encounter, we have the presence of different friends, intellectuals, and some other persons from other parts of the world who we would like to thank for being with us this day. With us, we have the presence of Abel Prieto Jimenez, president of Casa de las Américas, as well as the president of Cuban Journalists Association, as well as representatives of different press media. In this encounter, we would like to speak about the strengthening of the blockade against Cuba, so the way that Cuba has been facing the pandemic, as well as the national economic measures taken and to face the plans of the imperialism, as well as the riots occurred on July 11th and 12th, as well as misinformation against the Cuban Revolution, and the role played by the Cuban society, community work, and citizens' guarantees in this socialist state, as well as social inclusion policies. We, in this first session that we are about to start, is Cuba and what is happening in this country. We shall be accompanied by the first vice president of the Journalists Association in Cuba, Rosa Miriam Elizalde, as well as the professor by the Catholic University from Valparaíso, and José Ernesto Nováez next to me, who is leading the network in defense of humanity, who have been recently appointed rector of the Arts Higher Institute, as well as a chapter from the United Kingdom, writer of an important book, We Are Cuba, How the Revolutionary People React in the Post-Soviet World. It's a book that was published last year, and we have Txema Sánchez from Spain, who is leading the anti-imperialist program in that country, and the president of one of the intellectuals organizations in Cuba. And we would like to give the floor to the persons I have mentioned before. They will have some minutes for the presentations, as I will be taking some questions, comments from chats and YouTube, and some other mass media and people who are accompanying us and communicating with us. And each of these people shall be having this participation, and afterwards we have a question and answers session, as well as some comments. And each of the speakers shall have 3 additional minutes to make a conclusion of this working session, that I would say shall have some other moments of exchange, and some other days on the 24th and on August 31st. So we are broadcasting live in Spanish in YouTube, Resumen Latinoamericano, and through Tertulias in Cuarentena, that is led by Txema in Spain, and in English in YouTube, the People Forum, We would like to thank the solidarity shown, given by this space to be able to broadcast, and then I would like to give the floor to the Cuban journalist expert in digital communication, Rosa Miriam Elizalde.
Thank you, Jaime. It's a pleasure to be here with you, sharing with you and others in the virtual room. I just will take a moment to show my presentation. 10 minutes is a short time, but I will try to stick to the time. Now I will begin my presentation. Can you see my presentation now? Yes. Then I will show you some pictures to support my presentation. I would like to say I have agreed with Pedro Santander, a dear friend. I would say that he's half of my brain, to give you some background on the trending topic of July 11, and then I will give some coherence to my presentation. I think that the first element I should say that Operation Truth, such an extraordinary call summoned by Fidel in 1959, after 3 weeks after the beginning of the revolution, was the first time that we had such a large-scale presentation where journalists all over the world decided to dismantle the campaign against Cuba. This is somehow a precedent in terms of the Cuban Revolution, to dismantle fake news and all these media operations that have been long-standing. So meaning that from the very beginning of the Cuban Revolution, Cuba has been facing the offenses and lies over Cuba. We have seen repeated lies over and over again. So this is a campaign managed by the U.S. and as it is described in a book by Pedro Santander that states that this communicational war is the first field of the imperialistic world. It's a war that is expanding to many areas to cause confrontation and showing asymmetry and inequality. I won't spend on every detail of this operation against Cuba from Bush administration, which has aimed from the very beginning to lie about Cuba. But from the very beginning, the thinking tanks of the U.S. have had privilege to achieve this strategy. Since 2007, we have been seeing that the vision of Cuba in the world is being disputed by intoxication, which are contrary. This, as you're seeing, is 2 models of intoxication machinery, and we have been seeing that there are 2 types of networks that are somehow the core of this system against the Cuban Revolution. There is a decentralized network, which is in the left side, and the main organizer lies in Trump's administration, with many media companies supporting this with not so many audience. Playing a secondary role, but trying to raise consensus. The main organizer is located in Trump's administration. It was a moment of boost of many media companies supporting this campaign. There was not much audience really at the time. You see that they were playing a secondary role in Cuba's information, but it has a strong weight in building consensus on the image of Cuba, giving a big dimension in the media. And they were distributed during Trump administration from 2016. You can see that the Trump's chief of campaign was linked to Vox Party in Spain. This person, which is deeply anti-communist, you have then a series of events that are not so important from the web point of view, but they have been decided to operate social media. Some of them have the Cuba tag in the international domain, and they manage to this information targeting a specific audience. If you like data, you will find a website with data, and they will give an agenda on the Cuba government as part of this machinery. So the idea is to focus on sectors, popular sectors, or marginalized or self-marginalized sectors in Cuba. We must say that this machinery of the U.S. government, all of these laboratories are connected with the gaps, communicational gaps in our country. If we were to represent in the public space, this will be the representation, a really cohesioned one as to building consensus and trust building connected with the institutional links, but it is deeply analogical. You see in the center core of bubbles, which is not regulated in the digital space as it has happened in some other societies. However, this somehow this external environment has been the target of these big laboratories. So actually what we are seeing these are two universes. For example, you see here a graph of the study termed Cuba in Twitter, and you see this ecotypical chamber with two bubbles that are not connected between them. The institutional bubble, the Cuban one, in face of the Florida bubble. They are not connected, they are really polarized. And we are speaking of two main stakeholders, the influencers and the influenced people. We are seeing a really polarized world in Cuba. You don't see this as a whole, that are trapped in analogical spaces, and this is the target of these labs with high technology that has been already proven in some other places, including the US. For example, the attack on the Capitol on 6th of January is an example of this. Along this, you have the impacts of the pandemics, the distancing, the increase of the right transnational actions. You see a large flows from the right wing calling for end of communism, and they move like Pavlov dogs, launching a large flow to capture the attention of people of all the time, targeting people's emotions in the face of reason. The strong battle of what you can see. They tell you what you can see when you can read. There's a new architecture that is boosting the hegemonic media, intensifying reality, modeling political scenarios. So we have been witnessing a large flow of fake news and realization of Cuba's reality. As many research have indicated, this is a large war against populations, causing many social problems. In conclusion, what I mean is that July 11 didn't start that day. This somehow started before. But for me, this really started in February 2020. This toxic machinery was created in two directions. When Trump administration started, the end of communism is a premise of the right wing, and this was part of the Trump's campaign, and they also seized and took profit of these identitary flows, and they started these designs. And then we have, in addition, all these laboratories working on this. When you start analyzing the purpose of each media, including Obama's and Trump administration, you see that this is a part of the political U.S. scenario in terms of Democrats and Republicans. For example, these are some of the headlines from February 2020, where you can see this design of a cute face in Cuba with the peak in July 11. And you see these semantics in the headlines have been stated clearly. The detail is that the first coronavirus case in Cuba was detected in March 11, 2020, meaning 1 month after that. But the machinery, the designs, the patterns for modeling the Cuban scenario was already created. And in brief time, they were, for example, even able to create, fabricate a character such as Guaidó and Bolsonaro. And To conclude, I would like to thank Casa de las Américas for this sermon, for the topics that are going to be discussed. And we will be now speaking a second phase of Operation Truth for our country. I apologize if I took some other time. Maybe I could expand on some other terms.
Thank you very much, Rosa. We had some technical issues at the beginning. Some of you were listening in English language, not in Spanish language. I hope this is already solved. And anyway, part of the presentation was perfectly heard. And we would like to thank you, Rosa. Now we give the floor to Pedro Santander from Chile. And Rosa said before that Santander is the author of the Batalla Comunicacional, a book that was recently published in 2020 in Caracas. Pedro, you've got the floor, please. We cannot listen to Pedro. We see his PowerPoint on the screen. We would like to take some time to be able to listen to Pedro. Please turn on the microphone. Can you hear me? Yes, I can. I was getting nervous. We cannot see you, but we can see your presentation, and we can properly hear you. So, congrats all. As Miriam said, I'll try to continue the ideas, developing the ideas she was introducing here, and I named my presentation Cuba under attack as usual, as Rosa Miriam was able to share with us since the beginning. We're under attack as usual, but it's an attack that has a different dimension in the communication sphere. It's important to consider this. And I would like to begin this presentation by quoting the Cuban intellectual Fernando Martínez Heredia from the year 2017, when he says that the United States is ready to strengthen domination in Cuba through a cultural war. And it's important to speak about this because this is war, still a war, but in a dimension that is continued, but also is the end of something new in the way they express, and it is cultural sphere. American followed the logical viewpoint of the invasion. In the year 1961, the invasion and other physical military attempts of invasion of this kind to the island, to Cuba, now we are facing some other kind of invasion. And are you able to see the slides? Okay, perfect. This is a more semiotic kind of aggression, but indeed a different kind of aggression. And under this logical idea of aggression or invasion attempt, and taking back what Miriam said, we have to make two suppositions, two ideas. First, we have to think Cuba is under a permanent attack, but in a non-symmetric scenario. Totally asymmetric one, and I've been thinking about this because the way we answer to the imperialist aggression seems to show that we are in an asymmetric position, and this was perfectly seen by Vietnamese people. When you respond in an asymmetric context, in a defensive point of view, you have to consider that defense ideas. So you have to forget, sometimes when we forget about a single trade, we waste time and energy, and we look to the side or the way we are not supposed to look at. And the second last idea is related to the Congress celebrated, the Communist Party Congress celebrated in Cuba, and both Raúl Castro and Díaz-Canel were speaking about two different sides of attack, which are priorities, which are fundamental against Cuba. The usual one, which is the economic side of attack, and the second one, which is communication, which is media, and which was permanent as well in the fourth industrial revolution. The economic and the communicational sides need more reflection for revolutionary people. And the second side, which is communication, is predominant now. And we are to talk in this regard about Playa Girón 2.0, which is enclosed in the fourth generation war and also included in the fourth industrial revolution, has some operational theater which is different. This now territorial, but is the civil society as a whole, moral citizens behavior. And also I make a first consideration, which is that at some point and in some specific situations we are to understand and consider the people as an audience. In the second place, we have to consider that the main purpose, the objective of Playa Girón 2.0 is to undermine the state of mind and the mood. It's a subjective way of behavior of the population. Artillery bombs which discourage people. And the macro matrix of all attacks on Playa Girón 2.0 or Bay of Pigs 2.0 are led to discourage the Cuban population. This is a political discourage, and we have to show our moral and our strength. The different elements they use are given by technological possibilities, given by the internet, the semantic web, and everything we know about the social networks and so on. And once we said this, we have to characterize or give some features about the attack. As Rosa Miriam said, since the year 2020, the island, Cuba, have been under this attack. The attack, first of all, is ubiquitous, is fast, is digital, with wide range, and it's fake, it's totally false and fake, but it's to be believed on, because sometimes the enemy gives some ideas which are fake, but based on real facts. We cannot forget that. Cuba is, as Rosa Miriam said, is a lab of communication attack in this war, and it's going to be like that for long, and we have to be ready to face that. In this lab, which is Cuba, in the revolutionary field, we need to have a response lab. This is one of the things we are to start building, a lab versus another lab. This attack, we have been victims on, and we shall be victims on for long. We can detect and find three phases. First, the chronic phase, which is characterized by some poison given to the island. These cultural issues are fundamental. Who play an important role in these regards? The traditional media, the digital media, the intellectuals, and artists. Once this chronic phase, or this chronic phase goes to the acute phase, might be considered in between the San Isidro situation, the events in the Ministry of Culture, and this is the acute phase, and that happens a lot in the media. This is what I call the virtual entropy. It's a total disorder, lack of order in different contexts. When this is very much mature, getting down from the tree, because this is very, very mature, very ripe, then, and we have seen this in Venezuela and in some other countries, we have the trigger event, which happened in Cuba on July the 11th. This is a topic that was seen in the networks in the world. Is usually accompanied by fake news and erotization of all these elements. And in the acute phase, there is a lot of virtual entropy, and in the networks, everything starts, but then people go to the streets, and we were able to see that not only in Cuba, but in some other countries fighting against imperialism. Then we go to the response of the revolutionary field. If I have to make some briefing, I would say that in this kind of acute attack, we have been in the critical phase. We have the different slogans and surprise to the discussion for the communicational context. I believe, comrades, that we were from less to more, and there was an absence or a lack of anticipation for what was coming. We knew this is about to happen, but once again, as a revolutionary force, we were surprised by these events. We went from consternation, which is so passive, to the creation of responses and answers, and there is a number of platforms, permanent platforms, and the revolutionary field went from the slow process to the updating. We went to 2.0 to 3. To 5.0, from 1.0 to 3.0 web, and then we were able to analyze, and we went from analogical to digital logic. The revolutionary group went from logic and textual rationality to speaking too much about the enemy and considering the ideas. We went to the visual platform, to the visual context, which is so important, and we started thinking about our connection with our audience, going away from the enemy-centered activities. I'll give you two examples about what we are not supposed to do, and that responds to the first stage of our answer. Mistakes for uses and habits. I believe uses and habits, which are analogic from the 20th century, which are so common and natural, must be changed. As Fidel said, revolution is to change everything which is to be changed in the context of revolution. First, the images of the enemy. They say in Cuba there are no disappeared people or tortured people. This is said by the enemy. When we publish what they say, we are part of what they are implementing in their agenda. We have to be careful. We have in being centered, in denying what the enemy is saying. We have to be careful with the visual elements, those which are the continuation of the revolution, and of course the revolution continues. Have to be careful in the semiotic representation of the continuation of the revolution. See this other picture, 7 men, adult men, all of them, except the one in blue, all of them are dressed the same way, black pants and white shirts. We see no women. Women are behind, painted in this wall. This is the kind of semiotic elements we have to consider while responding to the enemy. And this is what Rosa Miriam calls the gap. But Cuba reacts in a marvelous way in facing this first textual reaction, so analogic, so slow. They have been reacting in a perfect way, in my consideration, to give a response to the enemy. We have seen during these days different initiatives, different communication initiatives against discourage and thinking about our audience, and how this Telegram chat, La Manigua, and I recommend you all to be part of this. A lot of people are following this. They speak about the island, they have some chats about these ideas, they have shown footage, short footage about this. We have some Telegram groups like La Cimarrona, and we have leaders in these groups which I consider have not been properly used. And there is a leader, as I said, who is Gerardo, who is all the time making communication. We're able to see different elements of this one, this Tricontinental exhibition that put together artists around the world, and with some communication and cultural responses to the communication attack suffered by Cuba, or Cuba is victim of. And then the question that raises is what to do. That's a question that all revolutionary people since 100 years ago are asking themselves in this attack side. The communication and economic one are present. We have to define all these strategies from the communication point of view. We have to make our progress and train our people in that side of communication. How? Some very fast issues. We have to be systemic. We have to have a systematic way of behaving. And Chavez said that communication was important in the Bolivarian Revolution, but was not present all the time because they needed to have communication, systematic communication, and then they had to work on education. We need to have a new logic, and for instance, to speak about the fake news, about bots and Cuba. And now I'll give you three priorities we are to consider. First priority is communication defense. We are not to use too much energies in this attack. We need to have some communication defense. We have as well as a priority to consider the audience, to generate knowledge, ideas, and different other strategies and interpretation in different communities. And we have to build as well some communication ideas, some communication programs and schedules. We have to establish conversations and dialogues using communication strategies. This is the work of the whole people proposed by Fidel Castro. And that has to be updated and taken to the communication and cultural world so that the word of the whole people might be able to face the fourth generation war. Thank you very much. I was very fast. To victory forever. We shall live and overcome the comrades.
Thank you, Pedro, for your presentation. You mentioned Gerardo. I'd like to recall that Gerardo will be joining us on the 31st as part of this space. Without a doubt, you are showing a exact map of our challenges and deficiencies. And you also referred to the enemy. You said that we shouldn't focus on the enemy, but it is there in a different context. Now I would like to give the floor to José Ernesto Nováez, coordinator of the Cuban Chapter of the Network for the Defense of the Humanity. Good afternoon. It's a huge pleasure for me to be here with you. really happy to listen to Rosa and Pedro with his clear mind as part of the left, and he showed some really clear-cut strategies on how to articulate them. I think that one of the urgent matters in the revolutionary field is to cover the wholeness and not to give in. I would like to highlight some ideas in regards to the events of July 11. We referred to the background, but this happened as a final point of previous strategies that were trying to connect with the largest amount of people and social sectors in Cuba. This context of crisis and very complex juncture in Cuba and in the world facilitated this. What to be highlighted about these events that unlike other previous events or specific activities or specific sectors of the Cuban society, what happened on July 11th shows that there is evidence that social media and the communicational field to which Cuba has been having access to in a very fast way as a society as a whole, this poses challenges to be connected to American companies and corporations. What people think of internet, Google, WhatsApp, Instagram, in the end they belong to a small conglomerate of American companies. So we are playing in spaces whose rules are adversary for us. These events show that the large capacity of subversion of social media as a tool in the service of the enemy. The 11th of July events show some of the complex features of Cuban society. There are actors connected to these events, social sectors that were displaced. We were not connected to larger sectors of the society that were showing some discontent, turned to the use of violence, and this is connected to the crisis of the Cuban reality, which is worsened by the effects of the blockade. In several places of Cuba, we're able to be connected simultaneously with larger sectors of the society that were channeling discontent. But these smaller sectors were not able to connect to other sectors. So that's why these July 11 events are very complex, and we should take into consideration several elements. I will refer to two groups of elements. First, it should be taken into account our own flaws. Cuba's model has been spinning on a socialist and sovereign project that has been looking for social justice as the main element. The 90s crisis, the reforms that had to be implemented to face the impacts of this crisis in the world where neoliberalism was winning. All of these led to setback to difficulties by our state, and the revolution was not able to maintain and not to allow to have these challenge achievements to be maintained. So they see the state activity as an obstacle for their own development. Then we have the challenge to understand fully how the crisis has affected the response capacity of the state and how we can rebuild this capacity. In the revolutionary space, we should think of the criticism role on our side to identify our own flaws. Those sectors of the populations that are not political stakeholders, that are not gangs, but they are working class, that how at some point were connected with the demands, the slogans of those other actors that sparked this movement on July 11. How we can take back the experience of community work, many of the projects that are part of the battle of ideas that Fidel defended before, although some setbacks happened, we were able to maintain a revolution that is standing, on how to rescue the capacity of the revolution to be able to reach the whole of the population, to protect and give access to opportunities given by socialism, by defending the premise of the revolution of defending the humble and maintaining the humble. They will try to summon some other events like July 11 using these media strategies and some other strategies. We should be clear on the agenda of these political stakeholders, the narrative they are using behind this July 11. We are trying to understand and respond to these. There are many areas of our reality that are being overlooked. They don't take into account the vandalism, and they're trying to show the revolution as a violent stakeholder. It was a very complex day where we were about to break the social cohesion, and we are working on rebuilding this and welding the ruptures that generated as part of this. We should bear in mind that behind this battle of aggression against Cuba, there is an attempt to support the annexionism project. This has been defended by the heirs of the Cuban bourgeoisie before 1959, which have been having a strong burden in the Cuban American community. They weren't able to achieve their targets of objectives before, and they cannot stand the Cuban socialist project that we were able to build. They are calling for these over and over again, and these attempts have been done in some other countries in Latin America against progressive governments. They insist on calling the Cuban government as a dictatorship, in practice, they don't respond to any political project at the moment. They are just calling for liberty or freedom. If we don't give a second name to this freedom, there will be just a word being used to attack any government or any other project that is against the project of the U.S. The main goal behind this process is to break the basis of the Cuban Revolution. That's how you see some communicational strategies not only target symbols of the Cuban socialist project, but also the sovereign country. Let us remember the attacks on Martís busts in Cuba by using blood. So these persons are not only denying the Cuban socialist project because they are defending the sovereignty of Cuba. They are looking for annexionism and maintaining these continued attacks on Cuba. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, José Ernesto. I believe you have mentioned some elements of narrative. This is related to legal issues as well as the capacity of the state to operate and to conquer its sovereignty and give the citizens the right to sovereignty. So before we give the floor to the next speaker, we would like to show you a contribution of Pérez Martínez, member of the National Leadership of the Cuban Association. What happened in Cuba on July the 11th? I believe the answers go through different ideas. First, we need to understand that Cuba is trying to build an alternative kind of society on which different conditions, external and internal conditions, have some impact. The internal ones are related to the economic underdevelopment inherited with inheriting contradictions, and the inherited contradictions speak about the ways and the methods in which socialism is built in Cuba. And in different occasions they have some good points, but also some mistakes and limitations we have been facing, not only in generating some social and public policies, but also in the implementation of those policies. Some other elements to be considered and related to the two previous ones is the multi-dimension war against Cuba, not only from the economic viewpoint in which we know the blockade plays an important role, but also it's a kind of war that goes through political, ideological, cultural, and legal matters. And precisely in this space where we try to establish some influence in the way of thinking, the people's way of thinking in Cuba, which is so complex and which is related to many questions, mainly how to impact the population, which are the elements taken by the population, which they have different kind of speeches, and which are the ways to influence the people, which are the logics of the population, and how they express that in participatory dynamics and in social dynamics. From that viewpoint, we can also understand that what happened on July the 11th was a combination of different elements. From the legal point of view, we have to separate the people who have the legal right to make a demonstration. This is included in the Cuban Constitution and also contemplated in the Constitution from 2019, and they were able to use their rights to express themselves. But we have to separate from different events that ignore the essential content of the Constitution to refer to the right to show ideas, to speak about their ideas. Cuba is a socialist state in which they have some regulations of some political individual freedoms and some economical and cultural rights. And as a socialist state, the main issues to be present are the guarantees not only to put into practice those rights, but also to consider different ways from the institutional point of view. So citizens are to have a legal protection in facing the possibility to be institutional. And one of the elements that have had more impact is the number of elements related to these events, which are tortures and forced disappearance of citizens. We need to have in Cuba all necessary mechanisms to be able to do research, to be able to determine or to be able to detect any kind of vulnerability in our rights. Not only having these riots or demonstrations, but also to consider some of the rights have been damaged or violated by third parties or by the authorities. We are to consider as well that it happens, as well as it happens in some other countries, the rights in Cuba are not limited. In Article 47 of the Constitution, they speak about the limitation of rights when they have an impact in third parties or when the public order, public security are affected. And this is an important element to be highlighted. It's legal to have many demonstrations in Cuba, given that this is a legal act and upon pacific basis. Professor Yuri Perez Martin from the Association of Legal Specialists in Cuba, who shared this footage about the ideas we are sharing today. And I'll give the floor to Helen Yaffe from the United Kingdom, who have been analyzing the way of endurance and resistance of the Cuban and the revolution and the people and the people indeed. Helen, please. Can you hear me? Yes, I'll try to share my ideas. Can you see these images? Yes, we can see some of them, but not exactly something you want us to watch. I see Pedro's presentation. I don't know what's happening here. Can you see it now? Now we are just see your face. Well, I'll try to start without a visual presentation. Are you able to see my presentation now? We are not. Perhaps you have two sessions which are open at the same time. As a historian, I would like to add some historical context about the conditions that enabled the demonstrations on July the 11th. I was in Cuba that specific day, and I just arrived in Great Britain and in quarantine, so the context is not adequate for having this conference, but I managed. So what I wanted to share is the memorandum of the assistant to a politician in the United States who spoke about the idea of sanctions against Cuba, and this the Malo's memorandum from 1960. And he says, recognizing the support given to Fidel Castro and the revolution from the people of Cuba, he built the only way to put together the people, and to eliminate that is to discourage the people based on economic difficulties. His conclusions are that the United States are to find a policy to weaken the economic existence in Cuba, and this is to be done, and I quote, with the denial of supplies, to diminish and also to diminish the salaries, and to provoke starvation, desperation, and lead to the defeating of the government. Many people in Cuba know about this, and then I have the name of it, which is the U.S. blockade, which is that an excuse? Is something we have been listening to all the time, all these years, and now more than ever before. So the reality is that the blockade against Cuba is the longest system of unilateral sanctions against any country in the modern era. It's not a legal issue or bilateral issue, as many of the politicians say. This is a key instrument in a number of tools that the United States have been using to be able to achieve the change of regime in Cuba. We have been talking about social media war, and some other tools are from the beginning the misinformation, lack of information, which was present in academic institutions and established with the objective to generate lack of information, misinformation, to show Cuba in a negative way, to have this lack of information, creating an idea of how Cuba was dominated by Fidel Castro, that there is no democracy, that Cuba was a lack of continuation of the economic history of Cuba. They say also that Cuba was about to achieve accelerated development, but was interrupted by the Cuban Revolution. And the other purpose of these institutions and researchers was to give information to the CIA and the Department of State for the implementation of actions against Cuba. And in this regards, we can mention some academics that speak about this kind of documents. When I started making studies about Cuba in the universities of my country and reading in English, almost the whole material I was reading were dominated by those working in this kind of activities in Cuban knowledge. And this is a long kind of draft and some other tools of this agenda against Cuba was the money that was spent in different programs against Cuba, and the figures can be shared in 1996 up to 2015. More than $1 billion was spent in programs to create internal stability, and to that point they had no success. So, to be clear about my statements, the blockade, sanction, embargo, whatever you want to call it, is an act of war. It's a violation of human rights of the people of Cuba and of all citizens in the world, because that blockade has an impact in all countries. It's led to stop and to undermine the development in Cuba, to stop the understanding of the socialist concept, and to create hardships in the people of Cuba. And we have seen that during Trump's administration, especially in 2019. Before Trump's administration, during his time, 243 new sanctions were approved against Cuba. And to be able to understand the impact of those sanctions, we need to know that ATA, almost 90% of the financial international transactions are performed using US dollars. So the United States has an important leverage, and they can allow or not to use dollars because they have control of all the dollars circulating in the world. So those go through banks in the world, and that has an impact in American citizens in Europe. The blockade have this extraterritorial impact. We know that during the pandemic times, more than 50 coercive measures were introduced by Trump administration that had some influence in Cuban capacity to respond to the pandemic. For instance, in the import of ventilators, in syringes, raw material, food, fuel, even international donations have been blocked during the pandemic times. This is happening even when most of the countries in the world favor the lifting of these measures that stop the capacity of a country before the pandemic. The United States are witnessing the lack of fuel, food, staples, and medical supplies, and me myself have contact with Cuban families. We know about the situation of people. People are waking up in the morning, in early hours of the morning, to make long lines, and after they are able to buy food, they have to go working. Nobody must be surprised because of the population in Cuba is frustrated and they are exhausted. And this is a result of a policy with the intention to create that specific situation. So, we are to see that Trump's sanctions and networks war are contemporaneous versions of the two-track policies developed by the United States since the beginning of the Cuban Revolution. Economic sanctions creating this situation in the population and also national pressure. And in this context, the hypocrisy of the President of the United States, President Biden, it's also to be noticed. He a failed state, and I was also a witness of the lack of products and the hard times Cubans have to solve as staples. But this is a country where Biden himself was not able to be in the position of in office because of the possibility of having a coup d'etat in a country where they have violent riots and people are killed, civilians killing other civilians and police officers killing civilians. I had some slides here showing that the United States is top in the list of countries that have people being killed. But also I wanted to show the idea that Cuba is a failed state because of the situation in the country. Some other people have been mentioning this concept. And by the way, last year I made a documentary on the Cuban reaction before the pandemic. And speaking about the reaction and mobilization to save lives, which is an example for the rest of the world. It's named the Cuban COVID-19 Public Health Science and Solidarity, and also showing that Cuba had sent specialized personnel to more than 40 countries. And now there is a sad and dangerous situation with COVID cases, mainly in the last 2 months, but in some other months, Cuba, since many months ago, Cuba have been in a very serious condition. And in Cuba, if you analyze a list of the situation in countries regarding COVID-19, the United States have the worst position, then India, then Brazil, and some other countries, and then in that very close to that position is Great Britain. And Cuba is in position 49 in that list. So that is the kind of propaganda, lack of information, misinformation which is relevant to be faced today. Is it pity you're not able to see my slides? Because the last slide shows it's demanding the end of the blockade. To be opposed to the political situation in Cuba, we have to face and to demand the end of the blockade against Cuba. Our governments are to implement the national policies in Great Britain as well as in the European Union. And in most of the countries in the world, there is a law that was passed precisely to say that the sanctions against Cuba, which are laws from the United States, and the application of those sanctions is illegal. Our governments, our legal systems are not implementing this law. That's why I say we have to implement our national laws, our domestic laws. Many countries in the world are participating in this program. This is a national law under the United States. So if countries implement their laws, internal laws, no blockade might exist. We are also to be opposed to networks war. We have to work to respond to lies and to manipulation, and to say our words against the undermining of the Cuban Revolution. And as well as Pedro said, I'm supposed to say to make some proposals about what to do. We need to say for everyone listening to us, and perhaps say what can we do from our governments. Our governments are not supposed to be supporting these actions of the United States against Cuba, and also having some international actions to protect Cuba from the imperialist aggression. And I have a slide here showing some pictures of Carlos Lasso, and the love bridges of love, and this is an example of what we are supposed to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Helen. Unfortunately, we were able to see your presentation, but we can later on upload it so that people can see it some other time. The last speaker of this afternoon is Txema Sánchez from Spain. Are you there, Txema? Using this space to give his thoughts, share with us his thoughts. Thank you very much. Hello, everyone, especially Cuba, the avant-garde homeland against imperialism and neoliberalism, standing there for over 6 decades. This is an honor for me, and I aim to articulate with intellectuals of the world, but when it comes to Cuba, Venezuela, I'm always there to give my strength. Since I am a militant in the anti-imperialistic communication, I always try to give my opinions. Digital communication has a unique opportunity to democratize information, a possibility to raise information, communication between intermediaries, to discuss who are being there, and the support to many people. Today we can recognize and share with a strong ideological persons. We could overlook persons that are recognized as to be the official left, and the rest could not be taken into account. Anti-imperialism is facing armies, not only fabricating fake news, but fabricating figures that have fake curriculums, such as is stated in the book How to Buy a Journalist. You could also use financing and articulated staffs that could contribute to this imperialistic narrative. As we could see in the history of Afghanistan, that speak of 20 years, but there is 40 years of history of the U.S. creating chaos in Afghanistan. Media is taking credit by apparently being the reference of the left in a space for them to give their credibility to the interests of the imperialism, gaining this credibility, and then they altogether become a bait for the global interests of the left. Suddenly, they seem to be the credible analyzers of fake news, but then they use these lies in the interest of the imperialism. The left suddenly is not able to recognize this. So the classic editorial lines of many media are hiding truth, placing them in one place and then using them in favor of the oligarchy and the bourgeois democracies. And they are the true creators of lies and don't defend the freedom of communication of the truth. In theory, and I've always commented on this, I'm surprised how people take it for granted. An authority cannot able to discredit an advertisement. They cannot do that. But the bourgeoisie, they sell in their campaigns lies, and you cannot do anything about it because it could be demanded. Social media, internet are an evident threat to power. So these narratives of demonization could give control and censorship to social media, and this could be at the service of the virtual company, and this could be a restraint to the truth. The truth is that with the censorship and the control that could be approved by the owners, the small known as Google apps could not improve our situation, but are the counter-revolution. But as Fidel said, it seemed that they were created for the real democratization of the information. And this would rely on the balance of forces. It is our duty from the anti-imperialistic guerrilla to be connected, to connect the militants, the intellectuals, to expand and support the creativity of the people, their dignity, their daily struggle, and for this real possibility of speaking, showing the truth, and to be able to win against these laboratories. Let's always work with creativity. From Cuba, we have been invited to join them in this communicational battle with strength and creativity and strong. So let us build new structures of communication with our own paradigms, articulating this communicational guerrilla, choosing a path that they will be in advantage compared to us. So if we break the schemes of these laboratories, we should introduce our own messages in their fields of actions. Let us place in two sides. If they work by building lies so that this could be easily believed and absurd common sense, we should maintain the principles of truth and not only truthfulness, because as Txema Sánchez said, the way wars could be dismantled could start with lies, but at the same time could start with the truth, and this should be done. So let us start by contrasting information, analysis of this information from a political standpoint. So politics is privileged in this social classes struggle. So So in the struggle of classes, we have the possessed and dispossessed. So let us start by disseminating the truth in spite of the economic crisis and sanitary crisis caused by this pandemic worldwide. Respect in Cuba how dignity is de facto an example of the development of the society, and with an economy that has been under siege constantly by the U.S. And even during this time, the U.S. government has worsened these policies against Cuba, taking profit of this international pandemic. And with the fall of tourism, which is the main source of income for Cuba, in spite of all of this, Cuba is an example for the world, and data show this even now when they are sending us a message like SOS Cuba, as if this case was only in the case of Cuba, but they are trying to mythify the socialism as a failed state. I would like to give you some data that some of you know, but many other people don't know. And the example I bring after this attack on imperialism, this data was collected like 3 hours ago from the Johns Hopkins University. It has a website where you can find references and sources of data on coronavirus. And I would like to share with you some of these data. I will show you this image. Can you see it? Yes. Now this first part, this is a comparison given by Johns Hopkins University. The deaths, case fatality, and the percentages of deaths per 1,000 inhabitants. So deaths cannot lie, but I think that the main data is the deaths per 1,000 inhabitants. And you can see in the bottom we have Cuba, stating that 100 times deaths compared to China. It seems like it is a lot, but as an economic power such as China, and as Cuba is more worried and giving more priority to their people, contrary to what large media disinformation say. So in Cuba has 100 times more than China, but let us see some other countries. Canada has double deaths per 100,000 inhabitants, and France have 5 times, and Spain 5 times compared to Cuba. United States has 5 times more deaths than Cuba. Brazil, 8 times more than Cuba. And then you have a hashtag SOS Cuba, and not on these countries. So let us remember that the truth that is not told, if you just analyze it, you can find it is there. But these researchers are manipulated and presented somehow, and you get confused. But we should have SOS, hashtag SOS Spain, but not SOS Cuba. And I'm speaking of Spain. And in the US, it's the same figure, 5 times more than Cuba. 500 times more than China. Seeing this slide, this graph, you could say something else. I'm thinking of the data and dates. Reading this web page, I was thinking about Florida. And Florida has a population of 19 million inhabitants. It's not the double of inhabitants of Cuba. Only 3 million inhabitants to be double inhabitants compared to Cuba. But it doesn't have the double deaths of Cuba. It doesn't have 8,000 deaths. Cuba has 4,000. And Florida has 40,000 deaths. So they have 211 deaths per 100,000 inhabitants. So compared to Cuba, you could see that there is much higher. So we could have an SOS Miami, given their situation. It is evident that in Europe we are able to repeat this word, capitalism, that this word could not be good for the human being, that is opposed to humanism, to socialism. And they overlook or ignore the word bourgeoisie. For example, democracy is eclipsing the word bourgeoisie. So why should we use revolutionary poetry to create poets or to build the revolution? And I would like to use this phrase. So should we use the bourgeois democracy to build democracy or the bourgeoisie? Fortunately, as it is explained by the colonized country, we deny ourselves and these constructed ideas. So this is in Europe prevents peoples to become united, because from the inside we are against the unity of nations, real democracies like Cuba's. And we should insist on this, that Cuban democracy, it has its own flaws given the situation it is living in. Cuba's democracy could be perfected, could be improved. Is 100 times more solid and real compared to the democratic countries of the world. In Cuba and Spain, there is a lot of possibility for the full participation of citizens. So the international recognition of these achievements of the Cuban Revolution should be disseminated, should be made known. Cuba is an example of internationalism and how society could be built by the people and for the people. We should be connected in this communicational guerrilla, and I would like to recall VTR's essay saying that it was necessary to use the education as a vaccine against these communicational attacks. And I will read these two paragraphs of VTR. What is the role of the people? I mean, the neighborhood, the common people, and deny this world that we have been living in the history of the common life. José Martí was the poetry, and for everyone it was only one thing. The real life is not a saturated imagery. The habit of using Martí's quotes was not able to keep us separated from his ideas or the daily life of the Cubans. I don't intend to make every citizen to be a person studying the work of José Martí, but I intend that every Cuban is a Martí follower. So if that person that would like to be a marginal could be vaccinated by Martí's ideas, that could inspire the deep love for Cuba. So Victier was an important intellectual, a great man, and for a small group that I belong to, he has beautiful words for everyone. So let us continue moving forward. Long live Cuba, long live Fidel, Bolivar, Chavez, and Martí, homeland or death we shall overcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Txema. I would like to profoundly thank you for reading these words from Cynthia Whittier, which are so relevant at this time. And as you said, we call this panel to participate in speaking about Cuba in present times. And now I would like to take advantage of this moment to say that to ask those in the virtual area to place the ideas or the questions. And we were talking about poetry some minutes ago, but this is a good base for the presentation of three Cuban creators, the artist Lesmia Bendumois, awarded with the National Award of Arts. We also have Dina Guerra, Director of the National Choir, and the Cuban writer Miguel Badmet, President of Honor of UNEAC. They have sent their messages that we would like to share with you. But before that, I insist those, the 28 persons accompanying us at this moment in the ISIS virtual area, please send a chat to us to analyze the possibility of participation. I believe we have to defend our homeland, and the homeland is priority. It's priority over professions, over the human condition, and we have to give everything for homeland. And this is not a slogan, it's a fact. In Cuba, we have freedom of creation. In all manifestations, we have that freedom of creation. We are lucky enough to have this artistic educational system from all levels of education. And I guess that all Cubans, children, kids, young people, adults have the right to go to those artistic institutions because the possibility to everyone is given without any differences concerning race or gender. And we have an ethnic composition which is very rich and very nice. It's a whole composition. We have no separation between black people and brown people and white people. We are mixed, as Nicolas Guillen said, and we shall be together favoring revolutionary arts. My position is the one I have kept all the time, to be firm and representing the principles of the Cuban Revolution. We have been going through, in many times of our history, through difficult times. Perhaps this is the worst one, because it goes together with the pandemic that strikes the whole planet. This is a moment of reflection, I believe. We have to be prudent, and we defend the values from Fidel, from a revolution that have used justice in all spheres, in culture, in education, in health. And we have to be together, united, but very much united, not with patriotism from the trenches, but from a word, patriotism given to us by Fidel. We can never get to neoliberalism or to savage capitalism. And the real solution of the problems in the continent, and we have been able to see that with our revolution. We're talking about human rights, the main human right, which is the right to life, culture, humanism, is socialism. Thank you very much to the persons who have put together this video from UNEAC. We're able to have some other people participating in this panel and spreading some ideas which are so important for us. We have been receiving some salutations from different organizations through the networks, the Cuba-Italy Friendship Association, as well as the Jose Marti Association from Rio de Janeiro, the Association of Friendship from Germany, the Mutual Friendship Association from Venezuela, the Solidarity Movement from Chile, the Embassy of Cuba in Ukraine from Switzerland, Angola, Mexico, Canada, Paraguay. They are asking if this is recorded, and yes, we are recording this program, and this is going to be present in YouTube and Facebook. And at the same time, we have created a channel, Cuba in the Present Hour, which is putting together all this material to be used lately. And someone asked, someone named Titan de Bronce asked if we can be more clear to the concept of viral utopia. And from Nigeria, Tobias Polanco from Mexico, he is in contact. I don't know if he is in the platform or if he is watching us from some of the channels. Cesar Aizaga Castro requests some literature to read about communication and ask for some other ideas to be implemented to face media war. Professor Pedro Santander was mentioning some of those ideas, and perhaps you can speak about that a little bit more. I need to read the chat from here. They say it's fundamental to have guerrilla, and we are celebrating the Congress or the Fair of Arts to implement new way to narrate what is happening in Cuba and to be clear about our processes. This is said by Sunia from Seattle. We have some greetings from Panama, from the organization in Panama, Permanent Solidarity. They convey the greetings as well as from Argentina. They say these are great contributions to this knowledge, and they talk about communication. So I think this is the opportunity to have a round with the panel members so they can give more elements about their presentations and to speak about media war, which is one of the most interesting issues today. What kind of antidotes to use? Rosa, please. I've been paying close attention to this debate, and I believe, first of all, we have to understand the scales, the different phases. The scales have been properly represented in the presentations we have heard. There are some scales related to domestic issues, to the situation in Cuba and the country from where this situation goes. There is also an international scale. You can have 11 million Cubans thinking about the reality of a country. However, at international level, we don't have that. We saw that clearly about the sonic attacks campaign, which was considered a syndrome in Havana. There was no single Cuban, no single scientist to be able to believe that or to explain this situation. But for Trump administration and in these 243 sanctions in this escalade, the Trump administration, as I said, used all that elements of sonic attacks for generating this situation, this economic and social situation in Cuba. And I believe that because of a shortness of time, I would like to be brief. And we are to articulate the networks and the different schemes and to be able to internationally generate some ideas to face the right wing in fighting the natural and people's processes, and so the left wing might react before this maneuver, which is posing an aggression against everyone. In Cuba, we have seen a number of actions that have been seen before, but they are repeated with the same schemes, with the same tactics of conventional war, and no one is exonerated from living away from this kind of ideas, which are going to be repeated in our countries. And we are also to create some context of organizations. This is related not only to actions but also to organizations to be able to defend our projects. Thank you, Rosa. And now we would like to give the floor to Pedro. There are two more questions about the issues related to communications, how to reinforce communication and culture to counteract this communication war, and also how to approach, how to reach the sectors which are not having televisions but who have a cell phone in their hands. David Rodriguez also asks about the impact of working in facing COVID-19, something which will be approached next week. Someone was asking me about the concept of virtual entropy, which is a concept created for this conference.
In physics, in computers, it has to have some input. In social media, this demobilization process could be built. Imperialism, that's to generate a series of strategies in the visual world to move to the offline world. So visual entropy is by going through the prodigal, the acute, and the critical phases. If this results to move from the visual to the real material in terms of chaos, moving the chaos from the digital to the streets. So the entropy concept bets on how to export from the digital molecularly to the streets. In respect to what some people said, I believe that first of all we should understand that sometimes some of our reasons could be useless. You could have 11 million inhabitants of Cubans. Tweeting could be useless because the flows in the visual world is controlled by the powers. So our strategies in the revolutionary world should be targeting the young people and the audiences. In the audiences, we should focus to generate what is known as communicational connection. When you're able to reach the public and seduce the audiences, you are generating a cognitive resistance in face of the imperialistic messages. And as the Spanish colleague was saying, data is in our favor, is in our side. You can see the data from Brazil, and you can see that the right-wing countries have the worst data compared to Cuba and Venezuela, but this is not important. What it is worth is the truthfulness. So we should not only respond in terms of the truth, but also in terms of the truthfulness, credibility, direct communication, as has been proven by Peru and Bolivia and some other countries where the large media corporation control communication. Direct communication plays an important role in this battle for hegemony. In spite of these contexts, the direct communication have a strong role to be played. Thank you, Pedro. So please, could you help me to know if there's anyone else in this chat willing to speak? I've seen some messages from Ireland, revolutionary greetings from Ireland. Searching Zuniga as part of the systemic campaign networks, highlighting the importance of lifting the blockade on Cuba. So now I give the floor to José Ernesto Nováez. Can you listen to me? Yes. Briefly, I would like to highlight two main ideas. This is a battle not only for Cuba, although Cuba is the main symbol. The battle is against capitalism, which is not only degrading the human life. In this battle against capitalism is also against the alienation caused by capitalism. As Ludovico Silva said before, which is the term of ideological surplus, not only in terms of production, but also in every area of life, because we are reproducting and producing what we have not created ourselves. The use of the tools of capitalism created to entertain us. And I would like to highlight another warning made in the 60s by Marcuse. Marcuse said, every society produces the technology that it needs. Technology is not neutral, but the result of specific necessities of a society. New technologies are the result of the needs of capitalistic societies. Every technology surrounding us, our cell phones, tablets, TV, from the moment we are using them, we should be aware that we are using tools that were created for alienation and reproduction of a scheme. It's not a matter about Cuba's survival. It is a battle for the humankind. And the latest news by how the nature is attacking human species shows that this communication of battle should be waged starting with the deep roots of this modern society. Thank you, José Ernesto. There's a new question from Angel. He's asking about previous experiences in some other countries that could be used in Cuba for the defense of communication in cyberspace. Helen, I'll give you the floor. Can you hear me? I would like to say some things. When I was in Cuba, I received many requests from mainstream media to give interviews, and I had to refuse the invitations in many cases because they were using technological platforms that from Cuba you cannot have access to. Only through VPN was able to be used. From one side you said that Cubans have to participate more in social media, but we should also recognize that these actions and domination of social media but for some reason this is a strong obstacle for Cubans. We should think how could we help our comrades in Cuba so that their voice is heard in a broader way. However, Cubans could do more, and this should be done systematically. For example, I went to Malecon in July 17. 100,000 people were supporting the revolution, and the president was there, Gerardo was there, was a demonstration of solidarity. And we were interviewing the people for a documentary that we are producing. But it would have been really easy for many Cubans having mobile data in their cell phones to be posted in Facebook, in Twitter, and many social media. So Cubans should get used to stream online what is going on. Really, the younger people should be more involved in this battle. So we are speaking of sharing Cuba's reality internationally, but I think that we have the support from the outside to educate Cubans, especially the younger people that is subject to a lot of manipulation about the realities of our countries, our real social problems. For example, police violence, drug consumption, drug abuse. I live in one of the richest richest country in the world, and there are lots of young people depending on charity to live. 33% of children living in poverty. These are not made up realities. These are facts of an imperialistic society. We should do more to share these information with Cubans so that they could really assess what the Cuban Revolution has given them. So I will stop here. Thank you, Helen. So I'm seeing some messages. So some of our comrades from social movements are asking for the slides. The posters from Nicaragua were receiving messages of solidarity and appreciation for this space. Now I give the floor to Txema Sánchez.
I would like to say in that, indeed, the anti-democratic policies which are representing these bourgeois democracies have to be faced and analyzed by Cuban youth that are still seeing that fake reality. One of the first economies in the world is England, and many people are in total poverty. Same thing happens in Spain. Spain is the 7th country selling weapons in the world, perhaps the first and the second in poverty rates in the European Union. So industries, no matter what the origin is, also generate employment and bring economic possibilities and about the issues asked, but some of those accompanying us is how to face a media war. And then some words from a friend come to my mind, which is heading communication work, which is Wafika Ibrahim, on an Arabic news channel. And she said that when she was living in Cuba, she's half Cuban and half from Lebanon, and she said that she asked Fidel what to do when there's mass training might take us away from the main role. And he said we have to look at what the empire is. But the empire was not across the sea, but next to the people of Cuba. And then it was important to learn how to face communication problems. And it's important to share in this communication war, which is so unequal. You are either against the empire or you are collaborating with empire. It's not a simple thing, but it's necessary to consider the information given by mass media, which is so useful and is also ideal, but also from Brazil. Guimarães said that we have to go over the language barriers and to use communication media. But even between organizations which are afraid to get together, or nations which are afraid to get together, there are some common points. Brazil is almost a continent. They speak, in the Americas they speak, most of the countries Spanish, but in Brazil they speak Portuguese. And it's important to overcome this lack of communication, because that's a way to be united and put away imperialism from us. Thank you. Thanks, Txema. I see Pedro is asking for the floor. I don't know if some of the representatives from social movements would like to take the floor, or some other ones which are connected would like to take the floor. We have taken most of the time we had planned for this conference. I would like to give the floor to Pedro first of all, and then if any of the persons here, or the persons here with us would like to say something, we will be more than pleased to give the floor to them. Pedro, we cannot hear you.
Tienes el micrófono apagado, lo mismo que pasó seguramente.
No, quizás si refrescas tu pantalla.
O refrescar la pantalla o algo. Nada, no te escucho. Sí, vamos a ver si hay algún otro compañero que... Veo aquí una palabra, Marcelo, ¿puede ser?
Marcelo, I guess he's asking for the floor from MCT. Can you hear me now? Yes, we can hear Pedro. I was saying that there is a diagnostic about this already done. I just want to say we have to make concrete steps about this. We have to focus on the audience, and then the defense, counter-offensive, and we have to ask some our comrades what country to consult to see what to do. I had the privilege to work in Venezuela with communication staff. At some point, they begged for the Venezuelan audience not to be all the time responding before the empire, but to approach the people of Venezuela from the communication point of view, and then to establish there this pillar, which is, and they have Telesur, and they also have people working in communications who are very active in people's communication, in digital communication, and in networks are now. They have some other people specialized in free software in working with some developers who are specialized in how to operate independently from the issues related to software matters. Venezuela has been also a target which is now defeated, and they have been facing the task on how to face the empire, and they have good structures, they are well organized, they are very active in resistance and in communication battle, but giving priority to their own audience, not only on responding to the world, to the imperialism, but on what to do externally. But they have been working on how to work with leaders, with all those having some influence, and Venezuela is a good example in this matter. I would like to develop some other round. I don't know if any one of those in the chat would like to take the floor. Any of the comrades is asking for the floor. Gonzalo would like to say something. Yes. Yes, I was making some debates and listening to the presentations about communication and networks, and I believe it's important to have some debate and then study. What are we saying when we say that youth are the main ones which are manipulated? Sometimes making some analysis of external issues is important, but sometimes that's a diagnostic of which is the population group which is influenced. Sometimes instead of thinking on how to approach youth, that youth is considered as an element which is assimilated from the counter-revolutionary spirit, and sometimes they speak about their own conservation, and new generations from different ages are able to communicate and how that have some impact in social networks. They sometimes are now the manipulated target. In Argentina, when we were analyzing votes and elections elements and data, about 40% were making neoliberal rights candidacies. Then the young population between 18 and 35 years of age were voting in progressive candidacies. This is just an example of specific country, but sometimes we might think, just to have some debate, about the idea of the young people to be manipulated, the only ones to be manipulated, but it's not so much true. But young people use mass media networks, but Facebook, for instance, is used by an audience of between 30 to 56 years, and they are not so young, but they reproduce some counter-revolutionary speech. And my intervention here speaks about how to consider that youth is the only group to be manipulated, but I just leave that as an open question and also as a reflection on how to think about the interventions, the materials to be used. This, what Pedro was saying, was interesting for me. We have proposals, we have to think about images, perhaps representing some ethnic groups, gender equity images, or perhaps some images that contribute with the reactionary speech. Those are elements to be considered, and as all countries said, we are to think about how to work with specific elements. We have to go from reflection and denunciation and report on how to implement specific policies and political policies, and which are the elements that have been truthful in the last years, and how to reproduce them with with a scheme and format with a semiotic lab, which is proposed in at different levels to be able to face these policies. Thank you very much. I don't know if there is someone else asking for the floor. So since Zúñiga would like to take the floor. Rosie, you are free to speak. So this is my flag of Long Live Cuba, Stop the Blockade. Has been great, all the ideas that have been shared this morning. I think, as well as stated by some of the speakers, we have to be critical about what is happening in our context to have a systematic evolution with a creative nature, but also to have this new way of saying. I've been to Cuba since many years ago, about 20 years ago, and I've been concerned about the whole, the package or the paquete, as they call that in Cuba, which is related to the cultural contribution with some creative and critical message. And thanks for this process that you have been sharing with us to be able to have some communication with the people. And as Pedro said, we have to have an immediate action, an immediate way of action. And other reactions go very fast, very expedite, and as Gonzalo said, we have to analyze which are the ideas of the youth and how we are able to do what we want to do, to build our own programs and not what is implemented and forced by the imperialism. Thanks to Cuban all.
Anyone else would like to take the floor? Fausto is asking for the floor. Fausto, go ahead. Good afternoon. We cannot see you, Fausto. I'm using my cell phone. I don't know if I can do it. So, greetings to everyone, to the panelists and everyone in the chat. We also went through these kind of events in April 18th. We continue in this media confrontation. These elements shared today help us on our own campaign and in solidarity with Cuba and in Venezuela that are facing these attacks of the empire. Let us continue with these efforts. Thank you for this possibility and for participating, allowing me to participate. I don't see anyone else asking for the floor, so I will give a small round of the panelists. Rosa Miriam, thank you. I just would like to thank you for this meeting. As I was saying, this is sort of a Operation Truth, unlike 1959. It's not only for the Cuban Revolution. This is an operation for all the peoples that are going through this dictatorship of the thought. We are trying to use the international platforms that are stronger than states and are articulated with non-conventional war laboratories, trying to subvert the order in many peoples. I always say that Vietnam lesson and Afghanistan shows that no technology can beat the will of the peoples. I would like to thank for this meeting and the possibility to meet with so much people that I didn't see in a while. Thank you, Rosa. Pedro? Can you listen to me? Okay. I would like to insist on two ideas. First idea is that this is not only a media war, it's a communicational one. And it's not only a communicational, it's a cultural one. And secondly, in regards to the asymmetry in Vietnam, I think that we still have to create doctrines in the communicational field, and one way to do so is by analyzing and creating creative responses in regards to this, and taking military categories and apply them and summarize them with communicational categories. If it's a war, we should be able to understand the war and connect it with the communicational field. I would like to state my happiness and at times overwhelming for how Cuba is facing culturally, communicationally, and politically these attacks. Many creative initiatives have been launched, and undoubtedly they will set an example for Cuba and for the rest of the peoples that are in this struggle. Thank you very much. Thank you, Pedro. José Ernesto. As everyone else, I would like to thank for this opportunity and respect. I think that the big lesson of the Cuban people is the importance of the political and communicational battle with a clear projection of the future. Let us not stick to responding to specific necessities, but to have long-term vision. As Che Guevara said, to have a strong and continuous work. We should seize the valuable experiences in terms of resistance of the peoples in face of many imperialistic attacks. We should share them and have them included. How we were able to build a revolution just 90 miles away from imperialism. Thank you, everyone. I leave this space really happy for everything that we have shared today, and we expect that this continues in the coming days. Helen, are you there? Thank you, José Ernesto. First, I would like to thank Casa de las Américas and every organization that have worked together to organize this event. I have learned a lot from the other panelists, and thank you to everyone else. Listening to the last three interventions, it is clear that somehow we are speaking of a new battle of ideas. This includes the ideological communicational fields. This is a battle, as Pedro said. This has been devised since 1959, aiming to destroy the good example as the good example of Cuba socialist. I think that in the book that was introduced, I have a chapter on the battle of ideas. There are some examples of the work that was done at the moment on how to know about the realities of many persons in Cuba, the problems they faced, and I think, and I'm confident on the Cuban system that they will return to this very important process and being able to reshape the Cuban Revolution, and they have the capacity to rejuvenate and what July 11th has led you to renovate the Cuban Revolution. We are here to give you solidarity. It's not that Cuba is a paradise, but Cuba is important for the rest of the world. Why it is important? If we don't have Cuba, what alternative of development do we have that places the people at the center? What example could we have of this small island in the Caribbean resisting over 60 years, 90 miles away from imperialism, being able to create its own vaccines to fight this pandemic? The response of Cuba to face climate change, projects life to mitigate the effects of climate change. This is important not only for Cubans but for the rest of the world. Thank you, Cuba, for your resistance. And I started this and I wrote a book about this. And so the importance of Cuba for the world cannot be measured. I conclude here. Thank you, Helen. Txema.
Would like to thank Casa de las Américas, UNEAC, the National Association of Countries of Cuba, and Martin Luther King Center, and some other centers for calling for this kind of meeting. I would like to finish by some remarks which I believe are important. I was saying before that Guimarães asked for unity, but to face Bolsonaro, and then we need to have the anti-imperialist unity so that France might be our front. I'm accompanied today by a flag from the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, which is also a country attacked. We are the same from the anti-imperialist front, and what I believe is that internationalism taught to us by the Cuban Revolution of the first step was taught even from the beginning when this revolution was fragile and they went to give their hand to other countries like Che Guevara in Bolivia. We are also saying how we have a front like Syria. They have been under a brutal war for many years. We are not to be doubtful about the governments we have to together with in Iran, in Syria, in Korea. Sometimes they don't have the total coincidence, but they are anti-imperialist, they show internationalism and anti-imperialist front. Thank you very much to everyone for this invitation, and I would like to wish and to listen to the debates you have planned for coming dates. Thank you very much, Txema. There are some rotten greetings, like the Peru-Cuba Coordinating Solidarity Group, Cuba-Canada Friendship Group, the Jose Marti Friendship Association in Mexico, Cuban residents in South Africa. There is a proposal to create a Caribbean and American cultural front to touch the emotions and to create awareness, and from the Basque Country also to have the month of solidarity from October from the whole world to Cuba. And with all these greetings, I'm being thankful to everyone that have been following us from different platforms in Facebook, in YouTube, with all those sharing with us in Gypsy, in the virtual room in Gypsy, and to everyone, all journalists. Perhaps you were able to see someone from the television just before camera, because we are trying to have this broadcasting in Cuba, in the Cuban audience. We would like to thank you all. Txema mentioned all the organizing institutions, which is not also Casa de las Américas, but also PEC, UNIAC, ANEC, the Network in Defense of Humanity, Martin Luther King Center, Resumen Latinoamericano, and some other organizations of civil society in Cuba. And we also had the participation of legal workers in Cuba who are going to be coordinating coming sessions, and there is great mobilization of organizations of civil society working in this initiative, and we would like to thank the people from the foreign to Corpin who from their pages are broadcasting this panel also in English language. We are meeting on Tuesday, 2 p.m. with a new topic, August the 24th of August. We shall be talking about challenges of urgencies of Cuba before the blockade and the pandemic and the serious economic situation. There is a number of panel members who are going to be debating from Cuba, from Havana. We thank you for being sharing with us. Please share the rest of the communication possibilities for others to be able to access to this panel, and thank you all. Thank you very much.